The cold November air bit at my exposed skin as I hurried across the parking lot of Bellini's, the most exclusive Italian restaurant in the city. My thin cashmere sweater did little to shield me from the biting wind, but I hadn't planned on spending any time outside. Mark was supposed to pick me up at the entrance. Another broken promise in our increasingly fragile relationship. My heels clicked against the asphalt, the sound sharp and lonely in the evening silence. I clutched my small purse closer, feeling underdressed despite the hours I'd spent preparing for tonight. Mark had been insistent about this dinner, our engagement announcement to his business partners and friends. People who mattered, as he constantly reminded me. "You need to look perfect," he'd said that morning, his voice carrying that edge I'd grown to recognize. "These people aren't like your friends, Emma. They have standards." The memory made my stomach clench as I approached the restaurant's gleaming doors. I paused to check my reflection in the darkened window, wavy chestnut hair falling just past my shoulders, the emerald green dress that had cost 2 months of my teaching assistant's salary, the minimal makeup that Mark preferred. I looked acceptable, I hoped. Just once, I wanted him to look at me with pride instead of criticism. The maitre d' greeted me with a practiced smile. "May I help you, miss? I'm meeting Mark Hayward's party," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "I believe they're already here." His expression shifted slightly. Was that pity? "Of course, right this way." The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of fine china. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in pristine white linen. The scent of garlic, butter, and expensive perfume hung in the air. This was Mark's world, not mine. I taught literature to uninterested freshmen while finishing my PhD. He closed million-dollar real estate deals before lunch. I spotted him at a large round table in the center of the room, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women dripping in jewelry I could never afford. Mark was laughing, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating confidence. He didn't notice me until I was nearly at the table. "Emma, finally decided to join us?" His tone was light, but I caught the disapproval beneath it. I was 7 minutes late. "Everyone, this is my fiancé." Not "this is Emma," just my fiancé, like I was an accessory, not a person. Tight smiles greeted me as Mark pulled out my chair with exaggerated gallantry. "We've already ordered appetizers." "You're fine with that, right, sweetheart?" I nodded, aware of the eyes on me, assessing and judging. The woman across from me, Stephanie, I would later learn, wife of Mark's business partner, swept her gaze over me with the precision of a scanner. I felt every flaw magnified under her scrutiny. "So," she said, swirling her wine, "Mark tells us you work at the university." "Yes, I'm finishing my doctoral dissertation on early feminist literature while teaching undergraduate courses," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. This was familiar territory. I could talk about my research confidently at least. Mark's hand squeezed my knee under the table. A warning. "How quaint," Stephanie remarked. "It must be nice to have such academic pursuits while Mark handles the practical aspects of your future." Before I could respond, Mark jumped in. "Emma enjoys her books. I keep telling her she can quit once we're married. No need for her to work with what I bring home." His laugh was joined by others around the table. My face burned. We'd fought about this repeatedly. I had no intention of abandoning my career after our wedding. Mark had smiled and nodded during those arguments, but apparently had different plans he was comfortable sharing with strangers. Dinner arrived, dishes I hadn't selected and barely recognized. The conversation flowed around me while I picked at my food, stomach too knotted to eat. Occasionally, Mark would pull me into the discussion with a "wouldn't you agree, Emma?" that required nothing but affirmation of whatever he'd just said. I felt invisible and hypervisible simultaneously, a ghost who was being watched. It was during dessert when I first noticed him. In the far corner of the restaurant sat a man who seemed to command the space around him without effort. Even seated, I could tell he was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair cropped short at the sides but longer on top. He wore an impeccably tailored black suit, no tie, the top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt undone. But it wasn't his appearance that drew my attention. It was the stillness around him. While the other diners seemed to shift and adjust constantly, he remained perfectly composed, like the center of a storm. He wasn't alone. 2 men sat at his table, turned slightly toward the room, their postures alert despite their casual appearance. A 3rd man stood near the hallway leading to the restrooms, his eyes constantly scanning the restaurant. But it was the seated man who held my gaze. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar, though I was certain we'd never met. I would have remembered. As if sensing my attention, his eyes, dark and intense even from across the room, shifted to meet mine. The contact was brief but electric, sending an unexpected shiver down my spine. I quickly looked away, unsettled by my reaction. "Emma? Are you even listening?" Mark's annoyed voice snapped me back to our table. "I'm sorry. What?" His expression hardened. "I was telling everyone about our honeymoon plans. The ones we discussed. We hadn't discussed any honeymoon plans. Mark had mentioned Bali once, months ago, but nothing had been decided. Bali, right?" I offered hesitantly. "Paris," he corrected, his smile tight. "Remember? We talked about it last week." We hadn't, I was certain, but contradicting him here would only make things worse. "Right," I said. "Paris. It sounds wonderful." "See?" Mark turned to the table. "This is what I deal with. Head always in the clouds." The laughter that followed had a cruel edge. "Mark mentioned you're having some family troubles," said a balding man to my left. "Jenkins, Mark's boss. Sad situation with your father, isn't it?" My breath caught. My father's gambling debts and subsequent disappearance were not something I'd shared with these people. They weren't something I'd even fully discussed with Mark, revealing only the barest details during a vulnerable moment. "I'd rather not discuss that," I said quietly. "Oh, don't be so sensitive," Mark waved dismissively. "Everyone here knows what happened. Your dad gambled away your college fund, mortgaged your childhood home, then skipped town leaving you with the mess. It's nothing to be ashamed of." But it was. The humiliation burned through me like acid. The careful walls I'd built around that pain crumbled as strangers stared at me with that terrible mixture of curiosity and pity. "It's not that simple," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sure it is," Mark continued, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. "Your father was weak. He couldn't handle his responsibilities. Unlike me, he raised his glass. I stepped in, helped Emma clear those debts. That's what a real man does, right? Takes care of his woman's problems." The debts weren't cleared. Mark had made a single payment to keep the bank from foreclosing on my mother's house. A loan, not a gift, as he frequently reminded me. Something inside me cracked. "That's not what happened, Mark." The table fell silent. Mark's smile froze. "What did you say?" "You didn't clear any debts. You made one payment and have held it over my head ever since." My voice was surprisingly steady despite the panic flooding my system. Mark's face darkened. "You're embarrassing yourself, Emma." "No, you're embarrassing me." The words escaped before I could stop them. "You've been doing it all night." Mark's hand clamped around my wrist beneath the table, his fingers digging into my skin. "I think the wine is affecting your judgment," he said with a forced laugh. "Emma's not much of a drinker. I've had water all night," I countered, pulling my arm away. "You know that." "What I know," Mark's voice dropped dangerously, "is that you're making a scene." "I'm making a scene? You've been parading me around like some trophy, making decisions about our future without consulting me, and sharing personal information I trusted you with." The table had gone completely silent. Other diners were beginning to notice the tension. Mark leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. "Stop this. Now." But something had broken loose inside me. Months of swallowed words and suppressed feelings flooding out. "No," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm done stopping. Done pretending. Done letting you dictate my life while treating me like I'm beneath you." Mark's face contorted with rage. He grabbed my arm again, harder this time. "You ungrateful bitch," he hissed. "After everything I've done for you? Who do you think you are? Let go of me." I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "I pulled you out of nothing," he continued, voice rising. "You were drowning in debt, living in that pathetic apartment, wearing clothes from discount stores. I gave you a future. And this is how you repay me?" Each word was a slap. The restaurant had gone completely quiet now, all eyes on our table. The humiliation was complete, burning through me like wildfire. "Everyone can see what you really are now," Mark said, standing up. "The daughter of a criminal, white trash in a designer dress I paid for." Tears blurred my vision as I stumbled to my feet, knocking over my water glass. The liquid spread across the white tablecloth like spilled secrets. "I want to leave," I whispered. "Go ahead," Mark sneered. "Go back to your sad little life. See how far you get without me." I turned to flee, dignity in tatters, when a deep voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. "You'll regret every word." The statement wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that instantly commanded attention. The restaurant went from quiet to utterly still. I turned toward the voice. The man from the corner table now stood just a few feet away, up close. He was even more imposing. Tall, with broad shoulders and an aura of controlled power. His face was striking rather than conventionally handsome, with sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and those intense dark eyes that seemed to see right through me. But what struck me most was his expression. Cold fury precisely controlled, like a weapon sheathed but ready. Mark blinked, confusion replacing anger. "Excuse me? Who the hell are you?" The man didn't acknowledge Mark at all. Instead, he looked directly at me, his gaze softening fractionally. "Are you all right, Ms. Foster?" He knew my name. How did he know my name? Before I could respond, Mark stepped between us. "This is a private conversation. Mind your own business." The man's focus shifted to Mark, and I watched the color drain from my fiancé's face. There was no overt threat, no aggressive movement, but something in that gaze made Mark instinctively step back. "Mark Hayward," the stranger said, as if tasting the name and finding it distasteful. "Real estate developer. Heavily leveraged on the Riverside project. Behind schedule and over budget." He tilted his head slightly. "How interesting." Mark's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Who are you?" "Someone who doesn't appreciate watching a man humiliate a woman in public." His voice remained even, almost conversational. "Especially not this woman." One of the men who had been sitting at his table now stood nearby, watchful and ready. The atmosphere in the restaurant had changed, charged with an electric tension I didn't understand. "Whatever your problem is," Mark began. "My problem," the man interrupted smoothly, "is you. Specifically the words you just spoke." He glanced at me again, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Words you will regret. I promise you that." He turned to me fully then, effectively dismissing Mark as if he no longer existed. "Ms. Foster, my car is outside if you would like a ride home." I stood frozen, caught between confusion, lingering humiliation, and a strange, inexplicable pull toward this dangerous stranger who had just interceded on my behalf. "She's not going anywhere with you," Mark sputtered, grabbing my arm again. "She's my fiancé." The man's gaze dropped to Mark's hand on my arm. When he looked up, his expression made my blood run cold. "Remove your hand," he said quietly, "or lose it." Mark let go as if burned. The stranger extended his hand to me, not grabbing, just offering. "Your choice, Emma." My name in his mouth sounded different somehow. Not a possession, not a criticism, just my name. I knew I should be afraid. Everything about this man screamed danger. But in that moment, standing in the wreckage of my engagement, my dignity in tatters, the only thing I feared was staying. I took his hand. His fingers closed around mine, warm and secure. Without another word, he guided me through the silent restaurant, his associates flanking us like an honor guard. As we reached the door, I heard Mark's voice, thin and strained. "Emma, don't be stupid. You don't even know who he is." I paused and turned back. "Neither do you," I said. "But I'm guessing you're about to find out." Only when the cool night air hit my face did I realize what I had done. I had just left my fiancé, my security, my stability, to go with a complete stranger. A dangerous stranger. Yet as he led me to a sleek black car waiting at the curb, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. "I'm Alexander Volkov," he said, as the driver opened the door for me. "And it seems we have much to discuss, Emma Foster." The interior of the car enveloped me in quiet luxury, soft leather seats, the subtle scent of expensive cologne, and a hushed silence that felt worlds away from the humiliation I just endured. One of Alexander's men closed the door behind me, then took his place in the front passenger seat. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped hair, said nothing as he pulled away from the curb. Alexander sat beside me, keeping a respectful distance. In the dim light of the car, his features seemed even more striking. The sharp angle of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes. He wasn't classically handsome like Mark, with his golden boy good looks. Instead, Alexander possessed a magnetic presence that made it difficult to look away. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. I shook my head, though my wrist still throbbed where Mark had gripped it. "I'm fine." The words sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Alexander's gaze flicked to my wrist, where red marks were already forming. His expression hardened for a moment before he reached into a compartment and produced a silver flask. "Drink," he said, offering it to me. I hesitated. "I don't know you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yet you got into my car." He had a point. I accepted the flask and took a small sip, expecting vodka. Instead, I tasted excellent brandy, warm and smooth as it traveled down my throat. "Thank you," I said, handing it back. "For the drink, and for intervening back there." Alexander nodded once, pocketing the flask. No man should speak to a woman that way. Especially not to you. There it was again. That peculiar emphasis, as if I held some significance to him that I couldn't understand. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "How do you know my name?" I asked. The brandy had given me a small measure of courage. He studied me for a long moment. "Your father worked for me." The simple statement hit me like a physical blow. My father, who had disappeared 18 months ago, leaving behind a mountain of debt and unanswered questions. The father whose gambling problems had spiraled out of control, who had mortgaged our family home without my mother's knowledge, who had vanished without a trace. "My father worked for you," I repeated slowly. "And what exactly is it that you do, Mr. Volkov?" "Alexander," he corrected. "And I have interests in many businesses: construction, import, export, real estate." He said the last with a slight edge. "Your father handled certain financial arrangements." The pieces were beginning to fall into place, drawing a picture I wasn't sure I wanted to see clearly. The mysterious men, the air of danger, the way the restaurant had gone silent when he spoke. "You're not just a businessman," I said carefully. His dark eyes held mine. "No." The car glided through the city streets, taking turns I wasn't tracking. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt strangely calm, as if I were watching myself from a distance. "Where are we going?" I asked. "My home," Alexander replied. "It's secure. We can talk freely there." "I should go to my apartment," I protested weakly. "The apartment you share with Hayward? Is that what you want?" There was no judgment in his tone, only a question. I hadn't even considered that. My living situation with Mark. In the span of 20 minutes, my entire life had unraveled. I had no plan. Nowhere to go that wasn't connected to the man who had just humiliated me in front of a room full of strangers. "No," I admitted, "but I can't just go home with you. I don't know you." "You know enough," Alexander said simply. "You know I won't harm you. You know I have information about your father. And you know you have nowhere else to go tonight." The brutal truth of his words silenced me. I turned to look out the window, watching as the glittering downtown buildings gave way to elegant residential neighborhoods, then to a secluded area of sprawling estates set back from the road. The car eventually turned onto a private drive flanked by iron gates that opened as we approached. Security cameras tracked our progress up a winding road lined with perfectly manicured trees. The house that came into view wasn't what I expected. Not some gaudy mansion, but a modern stone and glass structure that seemed to emerge organically from the wooded landscape. More men in dark suits appeared as we pulled up to the entrance. One opened my door, his expression respectfully neutral as he offered his hand to help me out. Alexander was beside me in an instant, his presence solid and reassuring in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. "Come," he said, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back as he guided me toward the entrance. The interior of the house was a study in restrained luxury. Open spaces, clean lines, and carefully chosen art pieces that spoke of genuine appreciation rather than ostentatious display. It was nothing like Mark's aggressively modern apartment, with its uncomfortable showpiece furniture and sterile white walls. "You're shaking," Alexander observed. I hadn't noticed, but he was right. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation at the restaurant was fading, leaving me trembling in its wake. "It's been a difficult evening," I said, struggling to maintain my composure. Alexander nodded to one of his men, who disappeared down a hallway. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a living area with a fireplace already lit against the November chill. I sank onto a sofa, suddenly aware of how exhausted I felt. Alexander remained standing, watching me with that intense gaze that seemed to see more than I wanted to reveal. "You said my father worked for you," I said, needing to break the silence. "Past tense. Is he—" I couldn't finish the question. "Dead?" Alexander supplied. "No, at least not to my knowledge." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by renewed anger. If my father was alive, why hadn't he contacted us? Why leave my mother and me to deal with the financial disaster he'd created? The man who had left earlier returned, carrying a tray with a teapot and cups. Alexander thanked him in what sounded like Russian, then dismissed him with a nod. "Tea," Alexander said, pouring a cup and adding a spoonful of honey before handing it to me. "My mother's remedy for shock." I accepted it gratefully, the warmth of the cup steadying my hands. "You haven't answered my question. What exactly did my father do for you?" Alexander poured his own cup before sitting in an armchair across from me. "Thomas Foster worked as an accountant for several of my businesses. He was good at creating creative financial solutions." His mouth twisted slightly, until he wasn't. "He stole from you," I stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes." The simple confirmation felt like a door closing on the last of my childhood illusions. I'd suspected, of course. The sudden influx of money, the expensive gifts, the casino trips. All signs I'd willfully ignored until it was too late. "How much?" I asked. $3 million. I nearly choked on my tea. 3. That's impossible. We never had that kind of money. The house, the debts he left behind. He lost most of it gambling, Alexander said. What he stole, what he borrowed against your family home, all of it went to cover his losses. He was not well, Emma. The compassion in his voice was unexpected. This dangerous man, who had just threatened my fiancé and who clearly operated outside the law, spoke of my father's addiction with more understanding than Mark ever had. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why approach me after all this time?" Alexander set his cup down, his movements deliberate. "I've been watching over you since your father disappeared." A chill ran through me. "Watching me?" "Protecting you," he corrected. "Making sure you were safe, that Hayward didn't—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "That he treated you well. Why would you do that?" "I made a promise to your father." I stood up abruptly, tea sloshing over the rim of my cup. "A promise? To the man who stole from you? Who abandoned his family?" Anger burned through my veins, hot and clarifying. "Don't pretend this is about honor or protection. What do you really want from me?" Alexander remained seated, unruffled by my outburst. "Sit down, Emma." "No, I want answers. Real ones," he sighed. "Your father came to me before he left, confessed everything, begged for forgiveness, for time to make it right." His expression darkened. He knew the penalty for stealing from me. The implication hung in the air between us. My father hadn't just disappeared. He'd fled. "So you let him go?" I asked incredulously. "On one condition," Alexander said. "That he never contact you or your mother again. That he leave you both free of his complications. You took my father from us." My voice shook with fury. "You made him disappear. I gave him his life," Alexander countered, rising to his feet. Though he didn't move toward me, his presence seemed to fill the room. "He took everything from you, Emma. Your security, your future, your mother's health." The mention of my mother pierced through my anger. She had never recovered from my father's betrayal, the stress triggering a series of small strokes that had left her dependent on round-the-clock care in a nursing facility. "I offered him a choice," Alexander continued. "Disappear and leave you both in peace, or stay and face the consequences. Consequences that would have destroyed what remained of your family. And what about the debt?" I asked bitterly. "The mortgage? Was that your idea of peace?" Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I paid off your mother's medical bills. Arranged for her care at Lakeside instead of the state facility." I stared at him, stunned. Lakeside was the best neurological care center in the state, with costs far beyond what my teaching assistant stipend could cover. I'd been told an anonymous donor had arranged for her placement, a story I'd accepted out of desperation. "That was you?" He inclined his head slightly. "Why?" I whispered. Why would you do that? Because I promised your father I would look after you both. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. And because I pay my debts. What debts could you possibly owe my father? He stole from you. Not to your father, Alexander said quietly. To you. My mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. I've never met you before tonight. No, he agreed. But I've known of you for many years. Since before your father worked for me. He paused, then added, since we were children. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. I searched his face, trying to find something familiar in his features. I don't understand. Forest Lake Elementary, he said. 4th grade. You were new. He hesitated. Not well liked. A memory surfaced. A skinny, dark-haired boy with a Russian accent, isolated and bullied. The classroom had been divided into reading groups, and I'd been paired with him. He'd been quiet but brilliant, his English perfect despite the accent that made him a target. Alec, I breathed, the childhood nickname coming back to me. They called you Russian spy, made fun of your lunch, your clothes. Something like surprise flickered in his eyes. You remember? Of course I remember. We were friends. For half a school year, until my father's job had moved us again. You taught me chess, and you stood up for me, he said, when no one else would. The memory came back in full. 4 boys cornering Alec on the playground, pushing him, taunting him about his accent, his second-hand clothes. I'd inserted myself between them, small but fierce, telling them to leave him alone. When they'd laughed, I'd kicked the ringleader in the shin, hard enough to make him cry. They left you alone after that, I said softly. Yes. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. My first protector. The realization of who he had become, what he had become, collided with the memory of that earnest, brilliant boy. Alec. Alexander now, he corrected gently. Alexander, I amended. This doesn't make sense. You can't have arranged all of this, my mother's care, watching over me, because I was kind to you in elementary school. Not just kindness, he said. You saw me when no one else did. You treated me like a person when others treated me like dirt beneath their shoes. His voice remained even, but I could hear the echo of old pain beneath the words. I never forgot that. The intensity in his gaze made me look away. So, when my father came to work for you, I recognized the name immediately, he confirmed. I kept my distance, watched from afar, until he stole from me, and I had to intervene. And then you what? Decided to become my guardian angel? The sarcasm in my voice couldn't quite mask my confusion. I decided to repay a debt, he said simply. To ensure you and your mother were cared for. And Mark? Where does he fit into this? Alexander's expression hardened. Hayward approached you shortly after your father disappeared, when your financial situation was at its worst. I nodded slowly. He came into the campus coffee shop where I was working, asked me out. He seemed convenient, Alexander supplied. The word stung with its accuracy. Mark had appeared when I was at my lowest, drowning in debt, working 2 jobs while trying to finish my dissertation, worried sick about my mother. He had seemed like a miracle, with his stability and confidence and promises of security. Did you arrange that too? I asked, a new suspicion forming. Did you send Mark to take care of me? No. The word came out sharp, almost angry. Hayward approached you on his own. I had him investigated afterward. His interest seemed genuine if... Calculating. I repeated hollowly. Yes, that sounds like Mark. Looking back, I could see how carefully he'd cultivated our relationship, how strategically he'd positioned himself as my savior. When he proposed, Alexander continued, I had to make a choice. Interfere, or let you make your own decision. You chose not to interfere. There was more accusation in my tone than I intended. You seemed content, he said, though something in his expression suggested he'd wanted to use a different word. It wasn't my place to disrupt your life, until tonight, I pointed out. What changed? Alexander was silent for a long moment. I was having dinner with associates. I didn't expect to see you there. When I heard how he spoke to you, the muscle in his jaw tightened. No man speaks to what's mine that way. The possessive statement should have alarmed me. Instead, it sent a shiver of something else entirely down my spine. I'm not yours. No, he agreed, stepping closer. But you are under my protection. You have been since your father left. We stood facing each other, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the subtle cologne that clung to his skin. In his eyes, I saw something dangerous and alluring, a hunger carefully controlled. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now," he said, "you rest. Tomorrow, we discuss your future." "My future," I echoed. "You seem very invested in something that isn't yours to control." "I have no interest in controlling you, Emma." His voice had dropped, becoming both softer and somehow more intense. "Only in ensuring you have the freedom to make your own choices, real choices, not desperate compromises." The word struck closer to home than I wanted to admit. Wasn't that exactly what my engagement to Mark had been? A desperate compromise, trading my independence for security? "I need to go home," I said, though the thought of returning to the apartment I shared with Mark filled me with dread. "To pack your things, yes," Alexander agreed. "I'll have someone accompany you tomorrow." "That's not," I began. "Hayward will be there," he interrupted. "After tonight. Do you really want to face him alone?" He had a point. The thought of confronting Mark after what had happened made my stomach turn. Still, I couldn't just accept this man's help without understanding what it would cost me. "Why are you doing this?" I asked again. The real reason. Not some childhood debt or promise to my father. Alexander reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away. When I didn't, his fingers gently traced the line of my cheek, the touch so light it was barely there. "Because from the moment I saw you stand up to those boys on the playground," he said softly, "I knew you were meant for more than being some man's possession. You deserve to be treasured, Emma. Protected, valued for your mind and your courage, not just your beauty." His hand fell away, leaving my skin tingling where he'd touched me. "I want to give you the chance to become who you were meant to be, without fear, without compromise." The sincerity in his voice was disarming. Here was a man who dealt in violence and operated outside the law, speaking of protection and freedom with such conviction. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" I asked. Something flickered in his eyes, desire perhaps quickly controlled. "The satisfaction of repaying an old debt. Nothing more." I didn't believe him. Not entirely. But I was too exhausted, too overwhelmed to press further tonight. "I'll stay," I said finally. "Just for tonight." Relief crossed his features briefly, before his expression returned to its usual controlled state. "I'll have Maria show you to a guest room. She'll find something for you to sleep in." As if on cue, a middle-aged woman appeared in the doorway, her manner efficient but kind. "Emma will be staying with us," Alexander told her in English. "Please make her comfortable in the blue room." Maria nodded, then gestured for me to follow her. I took a few steps, then turned back to Alexander. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for what you did tonight, for stopping him." Something dark and possessive flashed in his eyes. "No one will ever speak to you that way again," he promised. "Not while I'm alive." The quiet intensity of his words followed me down the hallway, wrapping around me like a dangerous embrace. Sleep eluded me that night, despite the luxurious comfort of the blue room, an elegant space with silk-upholstered walls and a bed so soft it felt like floating. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's contemptuous expression, heard his cruel words echoing in my mind. Then Alexander would appear in my thoughts, his dark eyes intense as he said those words. "You'll regret every word." I woke early, disoriented in the unfamiliar surroundings. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting the room in a gentle blue glow. On a chair by the window, I found clothes laid out, a pair of designer jeans, a soft cashmere sweater, and underwear still with tags attached. All in my size. The realization that Alexander had been watching me closely enough to know my size sent a chill down my spine, not entirely unpleasant. After showering in the adjoining marble bathroom stocked with high-end toiletries, I dressed and cautiously ventured out. The house was quiet, but not empty. I sensed movement, muted conversations behind closed doors. Security was visible but discreet. A man at the end of the hallway nodded respectfully as I passed. I found my way to a sun-filled kitchen where Maria was preparing breakfast. She smiled warmly, gesturing for me to sit at the island counter. Mr. Volkov had to step out on business, she explained, setting a cup of coffee before me, prepared exactly as I liked it, with a splash of cream and no sugar. Another detail someone had observed. He asked that you make yourself comfortable. He will return by noon. I should go, I said, though without much conviction. I have classes to teach tomorrow, work to do. Maria's expression remained neutral. Mr. Volkov instructed Victor to take you wherever you wish to go, whenever you are ready. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Maria excused herself, returning moments later with an unexpected visitor. Stephanie? I blurted, recognizing the elegant blonde from dinner the previous night, Mark's business partner's wife. She looked different in daylight, less intimidating, somehow more human. Her expression was tense, worried. Emma, she said, stepping forward. Thank God you're all right. Why wouldn't I be? I asked, confused by her concern after her coldness last night. Stephanie glanced nervously at Maria, who discreetly withdrew from the kitchen. You left with Alexander Volkov, she said, lowering her voice. Do you have any idea who he is? I'm beginning to understand, I replied carefully. He's dangerous, Emma. She clutched her designer handbag like a shield. After you left, Mark was beside himself. He told us about your father's connection to Volkov's organization. Mark knows nothing about my father, I said flatly. He knows enough to be terrified, Stephanie countered. We all are. You can't just walk into the lion's den and expect to walk out unscathed. Her concern seemed genuine, which was puzzling after her dismissive attitude the night before. Why do you care? I asked bluntly. You made it pretty clear what you thought of me last night. Stephanie had the grace to look ashamed. Last night I was playing a part. Mark's friends, his business circle. There are expectations. She sighed. Look, I've been where you are. The pretty young fiancé, expected to smile and nod while the men talk business. I know it's not easy. That doesn't explain why you're here, because no woman deserves to be a casualty in men's power games, she said, and that's exactly what this is. Volkov didn't rescue you because he's a gentleman. He did it to send a message to Mark. A chill ran through me. What message? That he can take what Mark values anytime he wants. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. Was that all I was? A chess piece moved to demonstrate power? How did you find me? I asked. Everyone knows where Volkov lives, Stephanie replied. His estate isn't exactly a secret. I told my driver I was visiting a friend in the neighborhood. She glanced around nervously. I can't stay long, but I had to warn you. Whatever protection Volkov is offering comes with a price. Men like him don't do anything out of kindness. The sound of a door opening interrupted us. Alexander entered the kitchen earlier than expected, his expression darkening when he saw Stephanie. Mrs. Jenkins, he said, his voice deceptively calm. An unexpected pleasure. Stephanie paled visibly, but lifted her chin. Mr. Volkov. I was just checking on Emma. How considerate, he replied, the words coated in ice. Especially after your performance last night. He moved to stand beside me, his presence solid and somehow protective despite the threat he clearly posed to Stephanie. I should go, she said, clutching her purse tighter. Alexander made no move to stop her, but his next words froze her in place. Tell your husband his Riverside investment would benefit from better management. The current developer seems unreliable. The message was clear. He could affect Mark's business, and by extension, her husband's. I'm not involved in my husband's business affairs, Stephanie said stiffly. Of course not, Alexander agreed smoothly. Just as you're not involved in spreading rumors about my guest, Stephanie's gaze flickered to me. Emma, the offer stands. If you need help. She left the sentence unfinished as she hurried from the room. We stood in silence until we heard the front door close. Alexander turned to me, his expression softening slightly. Are you all right? I'm not sure, I admitted. Was she right? Was last night just about sending a message to Mark? Alexander's jaw tightened. Is that what you think of me? I don't know what to think, I said honestly. 24 hours ago you were a stranger. Now I'm in your house, wearing clothes you provided, apparently under your protection. It's a lot to process. He nodded once, accepting this. Fair enough. But to answer your question, no. What I did last night had nothing to do with Hayward and everything to do with you. Why should I believe you? Because I could have destroyed him without ever involving you, Alexander said simply. One phone call would have been enough to ruin his business, his reputation, his future. I didn't need you for that. The statement was delivered without boasting, just a straightforward assessment of his power, and somehow, I believed him. She said, "You're dangerous," I said quietly. "I am," he acknowledged without hesitation, "to my enemies, never to you." His dark eyes held mine, and I found myself wanting to believe him despite everything. There was something compelling about his directness, his refusal to pretend to be anything other than what he was. "I need to go to my apartment," I said, changing the subject. "Get my things." "Victor will take you," Alexander replied, "and Joseph will accompany you inside. I don't need a bodyguard." "It's not negotiable, Emma." His tone brooked no argument. "Hayward is humiliated and angry. I won't risk your safety." Part of me wanted to protest, to assert my independence, but another part, the part that had endured Mark's subtle put-downs and controlling behavior for months, was strangely comforted by Alexander's protective stance. "Fine," I conceded. "But after that, we need to talk. About my father. About what happens next." "Of course," he agreed. "When you return." 2 hours later, I stood in the apartment I'd shared with Mark, methodically packing my belongings under Joseph's watchful eye. Mark wasn't there. Whether by coincidence or design, I didn't know. The space felt foreign now, as if the events of the previous night had severed whatever connection I'd had to this place. As I gathered my books, clothes, and the few personal items that were truly mine, I realized how little of myself existed in this sleek, impersonal apartment. Mark had chosen everything, the furniture, the art, even most of my wardrobe. I'd allowed myself to be molded into what he wanted, so gradually I barely noticed it happening. Joseph helped me carry my bags to the waiting car. As Victor pulled away from the curb, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the unburdening of a life that had never really been mine. Back at Alexander's estate, I found him in his study, a wood-paneled room lined with books. Real books, not the color-coordinated decorative volumes Mark had installed for atmosphere. Alexander stood when I entered, gesturing for me to sit in one of 2 leather chairs positioned near a window overlooking manicured gardens. "You got your things," he observed. "Yes." I settled into the chair, noting how the sunlight warmed the space, making it less intimidating than it might otherwise have been. Mark wasn't there. "I know." "Of course he did." "Are you having him watched?" "I'm having you protected," Alexander corrected. "There's a difference." I decided to let that go for now. "You promised we would talk. Ask your questions," he said, sitting across from me. "I'll answer what I can." "Where is my father now?" "Brazil, last I heard, under a new identity." His expression remained neutral. "He's not permitted to contact you or your mother. That was our agreement." The confirmation hurt, even though I'd suspected as much. He just left us. Everything we had. "He made his choice," Alexander said, not unkindly. "When addiction takes hold, people make impossible choices." The compassion in his voice was unexpected. "You sound like you understand. My father was an alcoholic," he said simply. "I understand the damage addiction causes to families." The revelation surprised me, this small piece of personal history freely offered. "Is that why you've helped my mother, out of understanding?" "Partly," he acknowledged. "And partly because no child should bear the burden of a parent's mistakes." His gaze held mine. "You've carried it long enough, Emma." Something in his words struck a chord deep within me, an acknowledgement of the weight I'd been carrying since my father's disappearance. The endless worry about my mother's care, the crushing student debt compounded by medical bills, the teaching load I'd taken on to make ends meet while struggling to finish my dissertation, all of it suddenly felt seen. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his eyes intent on mine. "Your father's debts are not yours to pay, Emma. Neither is his shame or his failures." "Easy for you to say," I replied. "You're not the one who had to pick up the pieces." "No," he agreed, "but I am the one who can take those pieces from you." A sudden wariness crept through me. "What exactly are you offering?" "Financial security," he said simply. "For you and your mother. No strings attached." I gave a hollow laugh. "There are always strings." His expression remained serious. "I'm offering to clear your student loans. to ensure your mother's care is paid for permanently, to provide you with the means to finish your dissertation without working 3 jobs. The offer was so tempting it made my chest ache. Freedom from the constant financial worry that had dominated my life for the past 18 months. The ability to focus on my academic work, security for my mother. And what would you want in return? I asked carefully. Nothing you're not willing to give. The ambiguity of his answer hung between us. I searched his face, trying to discern his true intentions. That's not an answer, Alexander. He stood abruptly, moving to the window. For a moment, he was silent, staring out at the grounds of his estate. When he turned back to me, his expression had changed, something more raw, more honest in his gaze. What I want, he said quietly, is to know you're safe, to know you're building the life you deserve, not the one forced upon you by circumstance. He paused, then added, and yes, I want you in my life, in whatever capacity you're comfortable with. The admission seemed to cost him something. This man who clearly wasn't accustomed to revealing his desires. Why me? I asked. Because of some childhood connection? Because of my father's debt? Or is this about taking something from Mark? Alexander's jaw tightened at Mark's name. This has nothing to do with Hayward. Then what? I pressed. Why would someone like you be interested in someone like me? He moved closer, his presence filling my senses. Someone like you, he repeated softly. A brilliant woman finishing a doctorate in feminist literature, who works 3 jobs and still finds time to visit her mother every Sunday. Who endured a man who diminished her to make himself feel larger. His gaze held mine. You underestimate your worth, Emma. Heat rose to my cheeks. You've been watching me very closely. Yes, he admitted without apology. At first to honor my promise to your father. Then because I couldn't look away. The raw honesty in his voice made my heart beat faster. This dangerous man, this contradiction, ruthless in business, yet surprisingly gentle with me, was offering me everything I needed, asking only for my presence in return. It was too good to be true. It had to be. I need time, I said finally. To think. This is all happening so fast. Of course. He stepped back, giving me space. Take all the time you need. You're welcome to stay here, or I can arrange other accommodations if you prefer. The thought of returning to my tiny campus apartment, with its leaking ceiling and temperamental heating, was distinctly unappealing. Yet staying here, in Alexander's orbit, felt equally dangerous, though for entirely different reasons. I'll stay, I decided. For now, while I figure things out. Relief flickered across his features. Good. I'll have Maria prepare a room for you, a more permanent one than last night's. This isn't permanent, I clarified quickly. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Of course not. 2 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. I stayed in Alexander's guest wing, ostensibly working on my dissertation while trying to process the dramatic shift in my life. Alexander gave me space, appearing only at dinner, where our conversations ranged from Russian literature to politics to my research on early feminist writers. He was surprisingly well-read, with insightful observations that challenged and engaged me intellectually. These evening discussions became a highlight, making me anticipate our time together with an eagerness that both thrilled and alarmed me. On the 3rd morning, as I was working in the library Alexander had placed at my disposal, my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Emma? His voice was conciliatory, a tone I recognized from our previous arguments, the one he used when he wanted to smooth things over without actually apologizing. We need to talk. I don't think we do, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Don't be ridiculous. You can't throw away our relationship over one bad night. He paused. I've been worried sick. Do you have any idea who you're staying with? Better than you do, apparently. He sighed dramatically. Emma, you're not thinking clearly. Volkov is dangerous. Whatever he's told you, this isn't about Alexander, I interrupted. It's about us. About how you spoke to me, how you've been treating me for months. I was stressed, he countered. The Riverside project is under scrutiny. Jenkins is breathing down my neck. You know how I get when I'm under pressure. The excuses were familiar, always a reason, never a real apology. How had I not seen this pattern before? It's over, Mark, I said firmly. I'll send someone for the rest of my things. You can't be serious. His voice hardened. You're choosing that criminal over me? After everything I've done for you? I'm choosing myself, I corrected. For the first time in a long while. He's using you to get to me, Mark hissed. You think it's coincidence he showed up at that restaurant? That he knew your name, your connection to me? A seed of doubt tried to take root, but I pushed it away. Goodbye, Mark. You'll regret this, he warned. When he's done with you, don't come crawling back. I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly. For all his faults, Mark had been a constant in my life during a time of chaos. Walking away completely was harder than I'd anticipated. I didn't hear Alexander enter, only becoming aware of his presence when he spoke. Are you all right? His voice was soft, careful. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. How long have you been there? Long enough? He admitted. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. But he had. Of course he had. This was a man accustomed to knowing everything that happened under his roof. Was he right? I asked suddenly. Did you orchestrate our meeting at the restaurant? Was it all some plan to get to him? Alexander's expression darkened. No, as I told you, I was there on business. Seeing you with him was unexpected. But not unwelcome, I observed. No, he agreed. Not unwelcome. He moved into the room, stopping a respectful distance from where I sat. For what it's worth, I think you made the right decision, because now I'm free to accept your offer. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. His gaze sharpened. Because you deserve better than a man who uses your vulnerabilities against you. The statement hit with unexpected force. Wasn't that exactly what Mark had done? Used my financial situation, my worry about my mother, my desire for stability as leverage to shape me into what he wanted. I'm sorry, I said, exhaling slowly. That wasn't fair. I'm just questioning everything. Alexander supplied, as you should be. His understanding only made it harder to maintain my guard. Here was a man who had every advantage. Power, wealth, my vulnerable position. Yet he consistently gave me space to make my own choices. I've been thinking about your offer, I said after a moment. And? I can't accept it. Not as it stands. I met his gaze directly. I won't trade one form of dependency for another. Instead of disappointment, I saw respect flash in his eyes. What would you propose instead? A loan, I said firmly. For my mother's care, and to clear my student debt, with reasonable terms and a payment plan I can manage once I'm employed after graduation. Alexander studied me for a long moment. You'd rather be in debt to me than accept a gift? Yes, I said without hesitation. Because a debt has clear terms, clear boundaries. He nodded slowly. And your living situation. I'll find my own place. Even as I said it, I felt a pang of regret. These few days in his home had been surprisingly comfortable, despite the circumstances. I have a property near the university, he said carefully. A small house. It's been sitting empty. You would be doing me a favor by occupying it, keeping it maintained. I raised an eyebrow skeptically. A favor. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Consider it part of our arrangement. Reduced rent in exchange for property management. It was a transparent excuse to continue providing for me while allowing me to maintain my independence. I should have refused outright. Instead, I found myself considering it. I'd need to see it first, I said cautiously. Of course. That hint of a smile again. We can go this afternoon if you'd like. As we stood there, something shifted between us, an acknowledgement that whatever was happening wasn't temporary. Whether as business associates, friends, or something else entirely, our lives were now intertwined. Alexander, I said quietly, I need to know what you're really offering. Beyond the financial help, beyond the house. What do you want from me? His expression grew serious. Time, he said simply. The chance to know you, to let you know me, the real me. Not just what people say about me, and if that's all I can give, then that's what I'll accept. But something in his eyes told me he hoped for more. So did I, if I was being honest with myself. Despite every rational argument against it, I was drawn to him in ways I couldn't fully explain. His quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness. the intensity with which he focused on me when we spoke. "This afternoon, then," I agreed. "I'll see the house." He nodded once, then turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused. "Emma?" "Yes?" "For what it's worth, I've never regretted a single moment since you took my hand that night." Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me with a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the sunlight streaming through the library windows. The house was nothing like I expected. Located on a quiet, tree-lined street just 15 minutes from campus, it was a charming craftsman with a deep front porch and windows that caught the afternoon light. Inside, original hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves gave the space character, while modern updates made it comfortable. "This is small?" I asked, as Alexander led me through the open-concept living and dining area. "The space was easily twice the size of my campus apartment, comparatively," he replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. The house was fully furnished in a style that somehow perfectly matched my taste. Comfortable, but elegant, with plenty of reading nooks and workspace for my research. In the master bedroom, a large desk was positioned before windows overlooking a private backyard garden. It was the perfect writing spot. "The previous tenant was a professor," Alexander explained, noting my interest in the desk. "He left some of the furniture when he relocated." I ran my fingers over the smooth wood surface, wondering if that was true, or if Alexander had furnished this place specifically for me. Given what I now knew of him, either seemed possible. "It's lovely," I admitted, "but I can't afford the rent on a house like this, even reduced. $500 a month," he said. "Utilities included." I turned to him in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. This house is worth at least 3 times that, even as a rental." "As I said, you'd be doing me a favor." His expression remained impassive. "The house has been empty for 6 months. I'd rather have a reliable tenant than let it sit vacant." It was a fiction we both recognized, his way of helping me while preserving my independence. The question was whether I could accept it. "I need to think about it," I said finally. He nodded, accepting my hesitation without pushing. "Of course." We toured the rest of the house in comfortable silence. As we were about to leave, a car pulled into the driveway next door. A middle-aged woman emerged, waving when she spotted us. "Mr. Volkov, I didn't know you were visiting today." She approached with a friendly smile, her gaze curious as it fell on me. "Mrs. Collins." Alexander greeted her warmly. "I'm showing the house to a potential tenant. This is Emma Foster." "Oh, wonderful." She extended her hand to me. "Helen Collins. I've been hoping someone would move in soon." "It's such a lovely home to sit empty." I shook her hand, struck by the normalcy of the interaction. This kind, ordinary-looking woman clearly had no fear of Alexander. She treated him like any other neighbor, not a dangerous criminal. "Do you work at the university?" she asked me. "Most of the renters around here are faculty or grad students." "I'm finishing my PhD in literature," I replied. "Perfect. My husband's in the English department. Medieval poetry." She beamed. "You'll love the neighborhood. Very quiet, lots of academics. We do a block party every fall." It sounded idyllic, so different from what I'd imagined my life could be after everything that had happened. As we drove back to Alexander's estate, I found myself reconsidering his offer. The house was perfect, close to campus, in a good neighborhood, with space for me to work. The rent was absurdly low, but perhaps I could find other ways to make the arrangement more equitable. "I'll take it," I said suddenly. Alexander glanced at me, surprise briefly crossing his features. "You're sure? You said you wanted to think." "I did think. It makes sense." I turned to face him, "But I want to amend our arrangement." "I'm listening." "The loan for my mother's care and my student debt. I'll accept that. The reduced rent, too." I took a deep breath. "But I want to do something in return. Something real. Not a fiction about property management." His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "What do you have in mind?" "You said you have legitimate businesses. I could work for one of them. Part-time, around my teaching and research schedule." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "You want to work for me? Is that so strange?" "Yes," he said bluntly. "Most people in your position would take what was offered without question. I'm not most people." A small smile touched his lips. "No, you're not. He considered for a moment. I have a foundation that provides scholarships for immigrant students. It could use someone with your background in education. A foundation? I couldn't hide my surprise. For scholarships. Not all my work falls outside the law, Emma. There was no defensiveness in his tone, just simple fact. Some of my businesses are entirely legitimate. I studied his profile as he drove, seeing again glimpses of the boy I'd briefly known. Serious, intelligent, determined to make his way in a world that hadn't been kind to him. I'd like to see it, I said. The foundation, before I decide. He nodded. I'll arrange it. 2 weeks later, I was settled into the Craftsman House, my dissertation progressing better than it had in months. True to his word, Alexander had arranged for me to visit his foundation, a well-established organization that had helped hundreds of first-generation students access higher education. I'd started working there 3 days a week, reviewing applications and developing new outreach programs. My mother's care was secured, my student loans paid off, and I had a clear repayment plan that would begin after graduation. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I could breathe without the weight of financial anxiety crushing my chest. Alexander and I had fallen into a new rhythm. He respected my need for independence, never appearing at the house unannounced, though I knew his men still watched from a distance, ensuring my safety. We had dinner once a week, sometimes at his home, sometimes at small, out-of-the-way restaurants where he was treated with quiet deference but not fear. I was learning there were many sides to Alexander Volkov, the ruthless businessman, yes, but also the thoughtful reader, the generous philanthropist, the man who remembered every detail of our conversations and challenged me intellectually like no one else ever had. It was during one of these dinners, at a small French bistro with a private back room, that everything changed. Your dissertation defense is next month, Alexander said as we finished our meal, a glass of excellent Bordeaux between us. How do you feel about it? Nervous, I admitted, but prepared. My committee seems impressed with the direction I've taken. They should be, he said simply. Your analysis of power dynamics in early feminist texts is compelling. He'd read my work, all of it, offering insights that had strengthened my arguments considerably. Another surprise from a man I'd initially feared. I've been thinking about what comes next, I said, watching him carefully. After graduation, the university has offered you a visiting professorship. It wasn't a question. Of course he knew. Yes, it's a good position, but temporary. I took a sip of wine. I've also received an offer from Eastridge College, tenure track. His expression remained neutral, though I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Eastridge is an excellent school, 4 hours away, 3.5, with good traffic. You're considering it, he stated. It's a better position than the university can offer. I set down my glass. Would that be a problem? The question hung between us, laden with all the unspoken complexities of our relationship. We weren't lovers, not yet. Though the attraction between us had grown steadily over the weeks, we weren't exactly friends either. We were something undefined, something still taking shape. No, he said finally. Your career should come first. I would never ask you to compromise that. Relief and an unexpected disappointment mingled in my chest. So our arrangement would continue? The loan repayment? The foundation work? If that's what you want. His gaze held mine. Is it? The real question lurked beneath his words. Was this all I wanted from him? A business arrangement? A carefully negotiated exchange of services? I don't know, I answered honestly. Alexander nodded, accepting my uncertainty without pushing for more. It was this quality, his willingness to give me space to make my own choices, that had gradually earned my trust over the past weeks. When do you need to give them an answer? He asked. Next week. He studied me for a long moment. Before you decide, there's something you should know. My pulse quickened. What? I've been negotiating with your father's former business partner, he said carefully. He owes me a favor. There's a possibility of recovering some of what your father took. Why would you do that? I asked. You've already covered those debts. Because it was never about the money, Emma. His voice softened. It was about giving you closure, a clean slate. The realization struck me with unexpected force. Everything Alexander had done, from watching over me to offering financial support to helping me build a future, had been about freeing me from my father's shadow. I don't need closure anymore, I said quietly. I've made peace with what happened. Have you? He raised an eyebrow. Yes, I realized it was true as I said it. The past doesn't control me now. I'm making my own choices, building my own life. Good. The approval in his voice warmed me. That's all I've wanted for you. Is it? I challenged gently. Is that really all you want, Alexander? Something shifted in his eyes, the careful control slipping just enough to reveal the depth of his feelings. No, he admitted. But I meant what I said before. I will accept whatever you're willing to give. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. His skin was warm, his fingers curling around mine with gentle strength. I'm not taking the Eastridge position, I said. Surprise flickered across his face. Emma, you don't need to— This isn't about you, I interrupted. Not entirely. The university has countered with a better offer. Still visiting, but with the possibility of tenure review in 2 years. Relief crossed his features briefly before he schooled his expression. That's excellent news. Congratulations. Thank you. I kept hold of his hand, but it is a little about you, too. His eyes met mine, questioning. I'm not ready to leave, I said simply. What we have, whatever it is, I want to see where it goes. Alexander lifted our joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. The touch sent warmth spiraling through me. I've wanted you since the moment I saw you again, he confessed, his voice low and intense, but I needed you to find your strength first, to stand on your own. And now? I asked softly. Now, he said. I want to stand beside you, not as your savior or your protector, as your equal. In his eyes, I saw the truth of his words, respect, desire, and something deeper, something that made my heart race with possibility. I think I'd like that, I whispered. His smile, a real one, rare and transformative, lit his entire face. Then we have a new arrangement. No more arrangements, I corrected. No more transactions or negotiations. Just us, figuring this out together. Just us, he agreed, his thumb tracing circles on my palm, and all the time in the world. As we sat there, hands linked across the table, I realized something profound. In trying to escape one man's control, I hadn't fallen under another's. Instead, I'd found my own power, and a man who valued me for precisely that strength. Whatever came next, whatever challenges we would face, I would meet them on my own terms. And for the first time in my life, that felt exactly right.